Hi there, and welcome to our very important webinar today, Understanding the Struggle for Israeli Democracy. My name is Joe Roberts. I'm honored to be the chair of JSpace Canada, a position that I took in December. And if you had asked me then, would Israel be facing an existential crisis? I would have said, probably not. But look where we are. 3 short months, the whole world has changed. That's why this meeting today is so important. We organized this in just a couple of days, and you'll hear from Meirav Jones, my fellow board member and the organizer of this webinar, when we started to talk about it, why this is so important. It's so important right now because Canadian Jews are asking questions about what's really at stake here. What's at stake for civil rights? What's at stake for democracy? What's the future look like? And what can I do? There's a lot of powerlessness in this moment from being so far away. What can we do? What can we say that will make an impact from Canada? Before we get started, I want to recognize that this meeting is taking place on the territorial and ancestral lands of Canada's Aboriginal people. And I want to take a moment as we think about what's at stake in the next week. Right? Because I think we've talked a lot about what happens around judicial reform in theory, but now it's down to brass tacks. This is the last week. The government has made every indication that this will be the week that things happen. And JSpace Canada is here as an organization to continue to advocate for Jews in Canada and in Israel who see themselves as pro-Israel, pro-peace, and pro-democracy. And that last piece is critically important. That's the purpose of us being here today. So with that, I will hand it over to Meirav Jones. Meirav.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I'd like to thank Joe and all the volunteers at JSpace Canada. And also, I'd like to thank all of the speakers who came together at really very, very short notice. And yeah, this has been an amazing period to be in Canada and to wish to be in Israel. I'd also like to thank my friend Miriam Zucker, who was really the driving force behind pushing me to organize this event after she had Ronit speak at the University of Toronto. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker for today, Ronit Levin-Snor. Ronit is a senior lecturer at the Harry Radisner Law School at Reichman University, which is also known as the IDC Herzliya. She's also a founder of the Israeli Law Professors Forum for Democracy, which was established to make the professional opinions of Israeli law professors available to the general public in light of the current government's proposals for judicial reform and the threats this poses to Israeli democracy. And after my friend Miriam heard Ronit at the University of Toronto, and I had said that I was going to organize a panel and bring her, and people were very excited. Co-panelists said, yes, this is definitely the right person. So I'm very excited to bring Ronit to you to offer you what she has to share with us about this moment. Go ahead, Ronit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation. And just to correct you that I'm one of the founders, and Dr. Yofi Torosh here is the co-founder with us. So these moments are really moving very fast. And I'll try to have my talk relevant for the next few moments as well, because we're constantly hearing new news about what's happening at the Knesset and in the government. And so I will give you some background about the plan, the coup that the current government is running against Israel's democracy, and I'll focus on the next step that is intended for tomorrow, which is the change in the composition of the appointment system, which is really what's at stake, because once the government controls the appointment system, they control the entire system. And so I only have like 12 minutes or so, so I'm going to run a bit quickly, but let me offer you to send me questions here in the Q&A or through our website, that is lawprofsforum.org EN, that's our English website. For Israelis, we have one in Hebrew too. Okay, so Israel is a very, very weak democratic system in terms of its formal construction of institution. And this is really something which is a bit paradoxically, that when you look at Israel's democracy, it seems to be very weak. We have only unicameral parliament. There is no entrenched constitution. There is some compromise that has been established 73 years ago, called the Harari Compromise, according to which basic laws containing the constitutional portions of the underwritten constitution will be enacted over time. As that included in 1992. You can see my shared screen, right? Yeah, okay. Is that included in 1992 the enactment of two human rights basic laws? And that is something that led to the current attack of the government and the right wing over our democracy, because as the court has been granted with powers to null void acts if they are unconstitutional. That meant that the government started to feel that there are some restraints on its powers, and that is something that most governments do not like, especially if their tendency is not towards democracy. So we lack many formal checks and balances. Again, there is no rigid constitution. There are no two legislative houses. There is no presidential veto. We do have a symbolic president. It's not a federally structure. There are no regional elections. There is no subordination to supranational courts or to multi-level supranational organizations. So, in other words, this is one of the most welcoming democracies to be taken over by dictators. And just to add one more point is that basically because of all the above mentioned characters, the government actually controls the parliament by definition. So wherever there is a government, it controls the parliament and it can pass whatever act it wants. And only very limited number of laws in Israel prohibit the Knesset from voting based on a simple majority. And so this current government abuses this unwritten norm that matters of constitutional importance are customary enacted in a cross coalition opposition lines. But this government says what's not formally written, what's not formally required, we just don't care about. And so they run with their current efforts to control the system. So the government already controls the parliament. And so the question is whether the Supreme Court will serve as the balancing actor in this construction of the governance. And so this current mostly men government, the 37 government, wants to abuse its control over the Knesset to furthermore control the Supreme Court. So in 2019, 3 years ago, the current prime minister was also the prime minister then, was indicted with charges of breach of trust, bribery, and fraud. This has led to a political crisis with 5 rounds of elections in a period of 3 years. Eventually, a coalition of change led by a combination of parties from right, center, left wings won the election, but it didn't last for long. And soon after, in November 2022, Netanyahu's led right-wing bloc won the elections. And this time, due to all kind of political reasons, but that what means that it's not necessarily reflects the popular vote, but this government, this parliament, this Knesset is more to the right than ever before. So all previous governments of Netanyahu were not as with that strong tendency to the right, and also Netanyahu wasn't in the past that concerned with his own status as an accused in a criminal court. So once he formed the current government in December 29th, it was revealed clearly, according to the coalition agreements, that this government is gonna try and change whatever it can. And as I said, due to the lack of formal limitations on the democratic system, the government thought that they will be able to take over Israel's democracy in no time. And just a couple of days later, after the introduction of the new government, Justice Minister Levin, and no family relations here, introduced its governmental plan for a constitutional reform of the judicial system. Now, you should know that because of Netanyahu's criminal charges, he's bound not to deal with reforms to the judicial system. Of course, it's impossible for a prime minister not to be involved, but technically he's not involved, and that led to two figures leading this constitutional coup. One is Minister Levin, the Justice Minister, and the other is MK, member of the Knesset, Simcha Rotman. And so they have presented to the public 6 major changes they advance to the judicial system, but actually to the governmental system, to the system of governance, all of which each and every one of them limits the power of the courts or the Attorney General, but all together make it clear that this government wants to have the entire power just for itself. So the first item on the agenda is, and that is what is going to be approved. We're almost certain tomorrow, maybe tomorrow evening, that is about politicizing the judicial appointment system, in the sense that the government intends to grant the coalition absolute control over the appointment of judges and justices to all courts. They have started with an extreme plan, which they advanced for a first hearing in the Knesset, one of 3 rounds of votes, which is actually 2 rounds of votes. Now they have prepared a somewhat different draft of the law, but it's still just the same, that they intend to have sole control over the appointment system, meaning there will be 6 members representing the coalition, ministers and the members of the Knesset, and their votes, the votes of these 6, will be sufficient to appoint or to recommend the appointment of 2 justices to the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and that is a total control over the appointment system. And thereafter, the threat becomes serious one, that is not only a fear, but actually something that becomes a reality. Now, it is coupled with their next steps, which are prohibiting judicial review of basic laws, meaning that every law that will be declared as basic law, which will be immune from judicial review, undermining judicial review of legislation, these powers of the courts that are currently can be executed by any court under any majority. The government advances something like 12 out of 15 members of the entire panel of justices of the Supreme Court. So effectively no judicial review of legislation, enacting an override clause that allows to reenact acts that were declared null and invalid by the court. This is something that they argue is just like in the Canadian case. Of course, this is a very good opportunity to remind you all that when you look at the system, at the constitutional system, you have to understand the entire factors that are at play. You can't just selectively borrow one item, like take the override clause from the Canadian system, take something else from the New Zealand system, from the Switzerland system, and just, as Professor Kim Shapley said, it just combines something which is a Frankenstein in a monster in its nature. And this is what they're doing. They're lying to the people all the time. They're saying just a few days ago, Netanyahu gave a speech saying we're just following solid democracies, and therefore all of you should just stop saying that it's about turning Israel's democracy over. And finally, diluting judicial review of the executive in terms of government appointment, which is something very relevant because of one of the ministers at Deri, which is now being reappointed by the government after the court declared that's impossible, and weakening the Attorney General. So I said these are just the first steps. The next steps will be very, very powerful in their effect on human rights and on Israel's democratic nature. That would include control over the police, military, public broadcast, activities of civil organizations, and of course it would lead, and my colleague Dr. Tirosh will speak about some of these items here. What does it mean to grant exclusive or almost exclusive power to the government in terms of infringing civil rights and protection over minority rights? Now, again, referring to Netanyahu's speech on last Thursday, he said, we will protect civil rights, and we don't believe him, because once you control the system, once you appoint the justices and judges that serve your goals, and once you remove effective judicial review, you just do whatever you want. So if it serves you, you'll do it, and if it doesn't, you won't. And so we are very worried about the risks this government poses to us. So let me just conclude my very fast briefing with one of the amazing facts and factors. And I started by saying that Israel's democracy is very weak in terms of formal institution. However, the Israeli case presents a huge question mark over the identification of democracies by their formal institutions. And what we saw, and we saw it last Saturday night, with over 600,000 of protesters across the country, which is a few percentage of the entire population, going out to the streets, making a very impactful resentment to the governments. Now, we don't have the legal power, it is true, but the democratic culture that is revealed by Israelis' actions is really inspiring, and it gives us hope that we are able to move forward and keep the democratic nature of Israel. And just for you, how can you help? So first of all, I've been asked to tell you to go to the protest afterwards, and there's a lot you can do, each and every one of you. If it's in terms of fundraising, if it's in terms of social media, just supporting us in other ways. I gave you the address of our website. You can write us an email. We'll be back to you as soon as we can. But the thing here is that we, Democrats, from wherever we are, must support each other. This is my take home for you. We must support each other, not because it's Israel, because we care about democracy And as Democrats, we have to raise our voices wherever and whenever Democrats are at risk. And so thanks a lot, Merav and everyone, for putting this event together. And I'll move the mic to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Ronit. I'm still taking questions in the question and answer, and I'll pose them at the end of all three presentations. I'd now like to invite Dr. Yofi Tirosh to present to us. Dr. Tirosh is an associate professor and vice dean at the Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law and a research fellow at Jerusalem's Shalom Hartman Institute. Yofi, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merav. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone that we cannot see, but I can somehow feel that you're there. We really, all of us, appreciate your care and interest. As Dr. Levin-שנור said, we are facing a situation of paralysis of the judicial system, a politicization of the nominations such that we have puppet judges that will be stripped of their authority to strike down unconstitutional laws. This is the first step, and as Ronit said, this step is essential in order to apply several directions of policies that will change the nature of Israeli society and regime as we know them. So just to be brief, before I get to women and LGBTQ+, and the effect of this regime change on them, this government is planning to annex the occupied territories and introduce a national apartheid. It is planning to turn Israel into a full-blown neoliberal survival of the fittest market. It's already introducing laws that would legalize there's no other way to say it, bribery, corruption. It sounds unheard of and illogical, but these are the laws that are on the table and are being legislated. You can cover expenses of public servants, meaning you can just pay them and they'll do what you need. There is a political situation that I'm sure Shai Agmon will talk about more, where a fundamentalist, messianic, religious minority is holding captive a prime minister that cares about avoiding trial and keeping his power. And when you paralyze the legal system, everybody gets hurt. Nobody's basic freedoms are guaranteed, but the ones that are always more vulnerable will be the quickest to be harmed here as well. So that just to give you a quick and very partial list of the plans of this government for women. The North Americans among you, even if you're Canadian, I'm sure you've heard of the Masterpiece cake shop case where a Catholic wedding cake baker refused to sell a cake to a gay couple. This government is planning to introduce a law that would grant business owners the right to refuse selling services or commodities based on the religious faith or of their customers. This means not renting a room to a gay couple, refusing to sell contraceptives to women, refusing to treat single women with fertility treatments, introducing quote unquote modesty laws when you enter a store. You have to be well covered in order to enter my store so as to not offend my feelings or the feelings of my customers. Another plan is to enlarge the authority of rabbinical courts. As you may know, the rabbinical courts in Israel have a monopoly over the marriage and divorce of Jews, and the same goes to Sharia, to Muslim courts for Muslims, and etc. But now they're saying these courts can be arbitrators in civil cases. It's all under the guise of consent. But of course, when you are an employee and your employer says, sign here that any legal dispute between us will go to the rabbinical court, there is not much leverage for negotiation for you. These courts are, I'll say manned. It's not politically correct, but it's the right term. They are manned by men, only by men. These are the judges, and they rule according to generation-old Jewish law that is very, very patriarchal, that women had no say in designing it and still don't. In Israel, you cannot be a rabbi unless you're a man. The Supreme Court now has a pending case about that, but who knows if it will be respected and whether it would be able to issue its ruling at all. And another plan is to give people ordained as rabbis advantage in public offices. So they will be equivalent to a BA if you're a rabbi, which is, again, not only a problem with meritocracy. People can be very educated on Jewish law, but not with zero education, civic education, economics, English, etc., but also that means that women cannot compete on equal terms. Now, when you look at the general message, when you look at the picture, when you look up at who is leading us, what you see is very few women, just in terms of head counting. So we have 32 ministers in the government, 6 of whom, only 6, are women, and only 3 of these women actually have ministerial jobs. The other 3 just have the title, the car, and the honors. We have 1.5 CEOs of governmental offices that are women out of these 36. 2 of the 4 parties composing the coalition, by definition, overtly declare that they will not have women as members of their parties, let alone as elected representatives. And in general, what you get is a message towards women that what we know simply doesn't matter. I call it epistemic violence, sorry for the academic language, and that what we need is impossible to receive, and that what we want is by definition too much. Like many other democracies, we have a plague of domestic violence and of homicide by one's partner. The government not only doesn't promote policies on these issues, it actively freezes and objects processes that were underway in previous governments, halting initiatives, for example, to sign a convention called the Istanbul Convention to prevent domestic violence, use electronic bracelets to track down men with restraining orders if they come too close to their ex-partners. Now, more generally, the dominant forces in this government carry the flag of family values, which is a wolf in a sheep's cloak or sheep's skin, to introduce again some sense of traditional hierarchical family with distinct sex and gender roles, which bring me to my pet subject, where I'm dedicating much of my activism until we reach the last 4 months, where we're all doing, public law, which is gender segregation. It's an issue that has been emerging in Israel for the past decade, but it has been curbed due to policies and judicial rulings. And now the coalitional agreements contain concessions to the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox parties to introduce and legalize sex segregation in everything from buses to to academic studies, to the workplace, to leisurely events, to the consumption market. The Western Wall, another contested area, will be an area where mixed men and women prayers will no longer be permitted. There are even objections to recent reforms to a more egalitarian Hebrew. As you know, Hebrew distinguishes between male and female pretty harshly. And this is all part of an underlying essentialist logic that seeks to entrench traditional sex roles where men will be men and women will be women. Before I close, I want to read you a quote from a woman who is an expert in halacha. Her name is Rabbanit Avital Cohen-Brenner. One of the great things that's happening is that people give speeches to their communities, and there are new voices that are emerging in the rallies throughout the country. And she said, "Oy for us if we come to a point where democracy has to protect us from Judaism. That a Jewish and democratic state means that we need democracy because of a Judaism that hates strangers and segregates women." So what we have here is not only an attack of democracy, but an attack of Judaism as many people understand it. And I want to close with a similar vein to Ronit's note, which is optimistic. I feel that Israelis have been working together. In the metaphor that I have is mycelium, I think it's called, the underground, the web texture of mushrooms that are connecting quickly and are creating a new soil and new energies, a new protein. We are extremely vibrant. We connect among our professional groups and between professional groups. We make things happen. We, for the first time, talk about why democracy matters to us and why we care about our basic rights. Had anyone told me 6 months ago that hundreds of thousands of Israelis will stand in the streets and shout, "Chukah, chukah, chukah, constitution, constitution, constitution," I would have checked their temperature. So I think we are really in a moment where, I hope without catastrophe in between, but we really have a good chance of emerging stronger after tough and long and deep conversations about what it means to be Israeli and write a new Israeli contract with better guarantees for civil rights and for a structure of government, and also for all other kinds of divisions of burden and of labor and of responsibilities among the different facets of this very diverse society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yofi. And thank you for everybody who's posting questions. I am taking note and we'll get to as many as possible. Shai, I'd like to introduce Dr. Shai Agmon. Shai is the Rank Manning Junior Research Fellow in the Social Sciences at New College, University, Oxford. With no further ado, Shai has been organizing information on this moment, our history as it's been happening, and I'd like to invite him to speak to us today.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming here today, and I wish to thank Mirav and the organizers for inviting me. And just I want to open with just saying that I wanted to speak next to Dr. Tirosh and Dr. Levin-Snur. I just want to say they are doing such an important work as public intellectual at this moment, and we should all applaud them for that. So thank you both for what you're doing. Now, in my short 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about the rise of anti-liberal right-wing populism in Israel in the past decade or so, which is, I believe, a dramatic shift in the political landscape in Israeli politics that created the conditions for this judicial overhaul or a coup that Rונית and Yofi talked about to take place. Now, right-wing populist parties around the world share three main characteristics. It's nativism, authoritarianism, and populism, which people usually describe only under the banner of populism, but all of them are important. So nativism is the tendency to view foreigners as an existential threat that must be fought against to ensure that the state is inhabited only by pure members of the nation. And authoritarianism is the veneration of social hierarchies and the opposition to any attempt to undermine them. So it relates to what Yofi talked about gender relations. And the third is populism. And in Israel, politicians are often accused of populism when they, play to the crowd or making headline-grabbing promises people want to hear, but they have no intention of keeping. But in academic research and recently in general discourse also, the term has another more specific meaning, which is a political approach based on a binary division between a pure homogeneous public and a corrupt detached elite. Now, according to this approach, elites never make innocent mistakes or represent the legitimate concerns of certain sectors, but are always working with malicious intent against the interests of the people. And populist politicians present themselves as the exclusive, uncontested representatives of these people. And therefore, someone who objects to a populist leader, by definition, objects to the will of the people and cannot be considered as an authentic member of that public. Now, in a pluralistic democracy, political parties and civil society groups are considered legitimate representatives of various worldviews and interests. But populist leaders, on the other hand, paint the public in monolithic terms and their opponents as alien and external to the group. And this is why populism can exist alongside democratic procedures such as fair, regular elections, even if its message that some citizens belong to the real people, while others do not, stands in kind of stark contrast with core principles of liberal pluralistic societies. And this is also why populist politicians express such hostility towards liberal democratic institutions like the judiciary or the press, since populists view only part of the public, namely their supporters, as fully legitimate citizens and perceive themselves as the only authentic representative of the real people. They see any attempt to scrutinize or limit their actions as an intolerable violation of the will of the people. Now, much like countries such as Poland, Hungary, and Brazil, populism was on the rise in Israel long before 2016, when Brexit happened and Trump was elected for office. In its current form, it was introduced by a few key figures, the most prominent of whom was, of course, the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And the origins of Netanyahu's populist strategies can be traced even to the 90s. Of Netanyahu's many populist statements in the 90s, two stand out in Israeli collective memory. In 1997, he famously whispered to ultra-Orthodox leader Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri that the left has forgotten what it means to be Jewish, in keeping with the classic populist formula of excluding an entire group from the boundaries of the true people on the basis of its political views, of course. And in 1999, Netanyahu gave a speech that has come to be known by the phrase he rhythmically chanted when given it, "They are afraid, הם מפחדים." And in this fiery speech, Netanyahu argued that Israeli media is nothing more than an extension of the left and claimed that journalists criticize him due to their deep-seated disdain for his supporters. And another pioneer of contemporary Israeli populism is Netanyahu's former right-hand man, which is now part of the liberal camp, ironically, Avigdor Lieberman. In the late 1990s, when Lieberman founded the Israel Beitenu party, he often railed against the elites, and this later, of course, extended to labeling them supporters of Fifth Column, Lieberman's favorite target, Israel's Arab citizens. Now, after Netanyahu lost the 1990 elections, right-wing populism contracted into a somewhat negligible phenomenon in Israeli politics and remained marginal throughout the first decade of the 2000s. And this started to shift after Netanyahu returned to office in 2009, though the change did not originate with Netanyahu himself. The watershed moment was an aggressive campaign led by newly established Im Tirtzu movement, if you know this movement, in 2010 against Israeli human rights organizations, in particular the New Israel Fund, the NIF, an umbrella funder of Israeli civil society. So a right-wing student movement, Im Tirtzu, made its name over the years by blacklisting anti-Israeli academics and artists, as well as portraying Israeli human rights activists as foreign agents and traitors who collude with terrorists. Now, the basic rationale and strategy pioneered in their 2010 campaign would quickly become the playbook for many right-wing populist campaigns in Israel in the years to come that we can see nowadays as well. The formula was simple: repeatedly present the opposition outside the real Israeli public, depict them as working against the state, and identify them with its enemies. Now, Israel's populist right since 2010 rhetorically excludes two groups from the people: Arab citizens and leftists. Now, while the nativist hostility toward Arab citizens has characterized Israeli politics for decades, the widespread delegitimization of the mainstream Jewish left only came to the fore post-2010. And over the course of a decade, a successful public campaign carried out by politicians, journalists, NGOs managed to cast a serious doubt on the Jewish left's loyalty to the ethnocultural group it belongs to, which is Jews, the national movement it is an heir to, Zionism, and the country in which it operates, Israel. And accordingly, the populist argument against the Jewish left is threefold. It is anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, and anti-Israel. And the boundaries of legitimacy in Israeli politics were redrawn gradually. The populist formula was applied more broadly as time went by. What began as a targeted attack against human rights organizations expanded to include left-wing NGOs that do not work on Israeli-Palestine conflict, followed by journalists and critical media, left-wing Zionist parties, centrist parties, and now it's anyone who is opposing what is now called the Netanyahu bloc. And each branch, now moving to today, each branch of the populist triad from which the current government is comprised of, the ultra-Orthodox parties, the religious Zionist party, and the Likud, embrace the right-wing populist logic for different reasons and in different ways. Each focused its efforts on a different combination of institutions and goals based on its voters' views and leaders' personal interests. So, for example, the Likud attacked the media and civil society groups over the years, but made less of an effort to criticize the Supreme Court. And in fact, in the first half of the 2010s, Netanyahu publicly defended the judiciary and even thwarted parliamentary initiatives to undermine its power. And the Likud increased its assault on the judiciary only when Netanyahu came under investigation in 2016. Now, the ultra-Orthodox parties were more focused on the Supreme Court because of issues related to the mandatory draft of ultra-Orthodox men, clashes with Supreme Court concerning state religious boundaries and gender relations, and the fact that one of their leaders, Aryeh Deri, was convicted twice for different felonies. And finally, the religious Zionist party employed populist rhetoric and strategies against a range of targets, from the judiciary, the academy, the civil service, to cultural institutions, the media and civil society. This is hardly surprising. The settler movement, its official institutions, NGOs, activists, and media outlets functioned over the last decade as a laboratory for developing populist messages that were later disseminated by Netanyahu and Likud members. Settler leaders, including, and it's important to remember this, including Israel's former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, were among the first members of the Israeli right to adopt populist rhetoric, presenting their movement as the sole authentic representative of Zionism, while painting their political rivals as detached, morally corrupt elite, alienated from Jewish and Zionist values. And over the past decade, this right-wing populist wave has gotten stronger and washed away from the Likud almost any member that was still considered right-wing liberal, in a way that has created a new division in Israeli politics. No longer the traditional left and right division, but rather those who fight for Israel's liberal democratic character and those who wish to radically change it into anti-liberal, anti-democratic directions. And what allowed the anti-liberal camp to do this, and this is the novelty of the new government, is that it is formed only from populist parties, and the interest of all parties to weaken the democratic nature of the country aligns. Netanyahu for corruption, kleptocratic-driven reasons, the settlers and the Jewish supremacists due to ideological reasons, and the ultra-Orthodox also due to corruption-related reasons and anti-liberal religious reasons. Now, I wish to end this survey, again, on an optimistic note, like my colleagues here. What enabled, at least partially, the rise of right-wing anti-liberal populism in Israel was the opposition, in my view. What is called the center-left camp has went a long process of depoliticization, ideological convergence with the right-wing views, and detachment from politics altogether. As they chant in the protests now, the bear has awakened, or so it seems. The liberal camp in Israel has lots of power, and in contrast to what happened in Poland and Hungary, it impressively tries to use it against the populist overhaul. This is encouraging because whether the judicial overhaul will pass in the Knesset this week or not, it is clear that the fight is the long-run fight against the Israeli anti-liberal movement, and at least according to what we see now, and in contrast to what many people thought before, liberal Israelis are up for the task. And one final thing. Because it's a short talk, I didn't have the time to say something about what I think is the responsibility of Jewish communities and other democratic communities around the world in relation to this crisis, but just one sentence. There are major, usually when I talk to liberal abroad, I think one should respect this view. They say, we don't want to meddle with your affairs, you're a sovereign democratic country, and we do not interfere with Israel's internal affairs. Well, it's a nice idea, but we are fighting in an unlevel playing field, and the other side, in this kind of ideological populist trends, gets lots of funding and help from people abroad. And if liberals abroad will stay committed to this view that they don't interfere with Israel's internal affairs, then we'll keep playing in an unlevel playing field with our hands tied behind our back. So we really need your help. And I think you can do a lot in terms of everything what Rונית said, fundraising, social media, putting pressure on international leaders, whatever you can do, this is the time we really need you. That's it, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shai. Thank you, all speakers. I should also just say that we're all volunteers here, everybody who's come here, everybody who's organized the protests, everybody who works in JSpace, everybody organizing rallies in Canada, including that today. So I'd just like to thank everybody, and just also everybody who's spending their time here on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening if you're in Israel. I've managed to consolidate 3 main questions that people are asking, and I'll start with the first. The first is whether there is really hope. The defense minister was just fired. Some members of parliament are asking for a delay. Some members of the government even are asking for a delay in the current legislation processes. Are there organizations who might help? We see the demographic change in the long term in Israel. Is there hope that the movement that's pushing now for democracy is going to have an effect in the long term, or is this are we just able to stall perhaps? Are you able to bring a message of hope looking longer term in Israel? I know that's a tough question, but I'd like to see if any of you would like to take this up, whether it's with current organizations, with current people in the government. At this present moment, things are not looking too great. Go ahead, Rונית.
I'm such an optimist, and I can't resist it. So this is just how I am. But I do have to tell you this. The Israeli left was left aside for years. We had no way, no direction, no path to go. And this has led to the current takeover of Israel's democracy. Because we weren't focused. We had no idea what does it mean to be leftist in Israel. Because as some people here asked, were we actually democracy a few months ago when we were controlling the occupied territories and destroying people's lives on a regular basis? Were we? When we were employing an apartheid regime, actually, were we a democracy? And this is just if we're thinking about the Palestinian people. Also in Israel, there has been such practices, discriminatory practices, that cannot go hand in hand with democracy. So this is why I say that at the current moment, we're able to crystallize something to ourselves. And I want to give you it in a very vivid metaphor. So the Federalist 10, it's a very known phrase that the court has no purse and sword. Okay? So the courts are something that's supposed to be there to employ rights, to have power, but actually they don't have the means to execute their position as in the constitutional regime. Now, what's happening these days is that for the first time, we see the rise of the purse, the full purse. This is the high-techist protest, and the sword, which is the military reserved people. And both of these protests, these branches of this current protest, they bring to the table something which is so weird to understand that is actually happening. And this gives us so much hope that if we'll be smart now, not to abuse this crisis, not to just try and finish it as soon as possible, because the contrary, we need to take this opportunity to build, not to rebuild, to build democratic institutions, to end the occupation, to find solution to all our problems, and do that in a week. This is naivety, of course, but we can do it together with you. And I said earlier, we have to have support from our friends across the world. And when we've just started to fight a couple of months ago, I invited Professor Shapley to give us a talk to inspire us. What can work? And I titled it, "What's Effective in Democracy in Crisis?" And she said, and I say to myself 100 times a day, we need to work fast and we need to work together. And we need our friends. So we need to take this moment where people who hold sword and purse and start talking about the Declaration of Independence, this piece of paper that nobody actually have ever read it, it's now screened on walls in Israel. This is so inspiring. And to speak about what Yofi said, the cry of the people for a constitution, it's not a simple thing. This is such a complex country. The complexities are something that Merav, maybe you need to mute. Yeah. The complexities are something that we don't know how to solve, but at least we were able to break this avoidance pattern of the majority of the central left people in Israel. So if we'll take that furthermore, we will be able, maybe, and still optimism is needed, to do something together.
Thank you very much. Because we have 2 more questions, I'm going to pose them, and then if anybody wants to go back to that first question, that's also fine. I'd just like to give everybody an opportunity. We have a very contentious question on the table. Some people are asking and some people are saying, how can you ask that? But I'd like to pose it. Someone said, if you had asked Israeli Arabs or Arabs in the occupied territories about Israeli democracy, they would not have thought that Israel was a democracy even before. So some people are asking, did we have to get to this moment in order for us to see the problems in Israeli democracy? Some are saying, will this moment propel us to extend concern for democracy and human rights beyond the Jewish population and into concerns about territories and about annexation? will the left be stronger on these issues? And others are worried, these are really complex questions. Do we really have to be thinking about the Arab Israelis if what we're concerned about is Israeli democracy? Are these issues related? So I'd like to open this up to you. We have not very much time. This is a huge question. So maybe I'll hear one person for a short time and see. These are going to be ongoing conversations. Go ahead, Yoav.
So it's not only that the Israeli Arabs and the Palestinians feel we're not in democracy. There are many among us who feel that. I can share with you from the activism. I'll say half jokingly that I think some moments I think that this whole constitutional crisis is a conspiracy of Mark Zuckerberg, because the WhatsApp usage in Israel has risen exponentially, and we collaborate through WhatsApp. And in our own discussions about phrasing of, we say as law professors, this is a threat to democracy, there is always the repeated gesture, but we're not a democracy. Okay, so how do we move forward? In the beginning of the rallies, there was a lot of contention about Palestinian flags. People were like, yeah, we even if we agree that the occupation is bad, we need to leave this aside for now, because otherwise we will alienate many of the protesters. Call me naive, but I think as part of this new conversation that Ronit so beautifully described, that we have a platform for, we have a movement of potential reckoning with wrongs and with injustices, and also with unworthy dismissal of the people who are so central in this country, basically of the left, of the industrious middle class, of the quote-unquote elites that have been so looked down upon for decades in Israel. I think there is also a very strong potential for speaking in a language of universal human rights, of being intolerant to any injustice, and even from utilitarian reasons, if not for the love of rights and for the love of equality, even if only because Israelis do not want to be ostracized as a nation and be, a new manifestation of South Africa, even if because they want their children or themselves who served in the security forces to be able to travel in the world freely, which they're not going to be able to because the government is legislating legal immunity to stand in trial in Israel, which will then give authority to international tribunals to bring to trial people for war crimes. All of these, I think, make it a true potential to introduce a new conversation and a new consciousness, both about the wrongs in the territories and within Israel. I will say that it's an incredibly complex moment when we appropriate the Declaration of Independence and the flag and our national anthem, Hatikva. It really is difficult for Israeli Arabs to be part of these symbols and these rituals. They're not there enough in the conversation and in the rallies and in the protests, and this is one of the most pressing tasks that we have, to bring them along to this new conversation.
Thank you very much.
Can I say something quick about it, or you want to move on to the third? I just I don't know who asked this question, but I just wanna, as like a phenomena I just wanna talk about what the motivation behind this question about kind of Israeli Arabs and Palestinians in general with relations to this protest, because one intention is to just point to the hypocrisy. The liberal camp in Israel now is not really liberal. We've never been a democracy. And then I just wonder, what's the point of this question? Because I have many radical lefty friends who are saying, Israel would never been a democracy in a way that kind of makes this protest illegitimate. And to that, if the motivation to ask this question is the hypocrisy-driven motivation, I just want to say this is irrelevant now. We're in a moment that if the populist right wing will win, it will be extremely worse for everyone. It's not an intellectual criticism that you write an article about. It's not an exercise of aesthetics or individual morality that you cannot protest with someone who is more right-wing than you. It's not that. We're not in that moment. We're in a moment of constitutional crisis that for Palestinians and Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews, it will be worse for everyone. So I just want to put the aesthetics aside and just say that everybody that can resist should resist. And a second point on that is that, yes, I do hope, because I think that the kind of democratic backsliding of Israel is just so related and intertwined with the occupation and the fact that we have no democratic norms in Israel is related a lot to the occupation and the way we treat Israel treats its Arab citizens and its occupied territories. I do hope that we will be able to, like Yofi said, take advantage of this situation, try to kind of trying to make a lemonade out of the lemons, but this is not the moment. We need first to win this fight, and then take the powers that the awakening of the bear and everything, and try to make new politics. But I just don't want people to use the usual criticism against Israel to kind of not protest or to depoliticize this moment and to be not active. That's basically what I want to say.
Thank you, Shay. And I will attest that I have friends on both sides of this, some who are very uncomfortable with Palestinian flags in the first of these protests, and some who were saying that they didn't want to protest if the occupation wasn't part of the protest. And today in Israel, all of these people are together in the protests. This is really a moment. I think it's very important for Canadians to know this, that Israelis are united at this moment. We had one more question. We are at the end of our time. I am going to pose the question, but before I do, because I know that some people might need to leave and we have another protest in an hour, I just want to end on a note of what we can do, people who are at this symposium and who are in Canada at the moment. JSpace Canada is continuing to put out information and updates and to be involved and to let everybody know what's happening in Israel. At the same time, there is a group called Unacceptable Toronto that is running protests weekly at Nathan Phillips Square. I will be going to that protest after I leave this meeting, and I would encourage everybody to join. I've received multiple messages from people in Israel that does make a difference. I think what we can do is to remain informed, to speak to people about this moment with the information, whether it's from here or from other channels that we're able to get reliable information, and to continue to stand by our people in Israel, whether it's by donating, whether it's by sharing information, by sharing photos, by sharing materials.
Meirav, I have to add, it's 10 p.m. in Tel Aviv, and everybody's going out to the center of Tel Aviv, to Kaplan, where the rallies are, to protest against the firing of the minister. So I'm going to leave my office after this webinar and go protest. And I'm so happy that you will too.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. The last question that we had today was about how we got here. And I feel that Shai did give us an answer. The reason I want to put this question again is that people asked specifically, was this a response partly to the previous government? Did it move too quickly in liberal directions on various platforms? Do you think that that is something that happened here? Or was this a long-term plan? You know, when Shai talks about the rise of populism, the rise of the radical right, Bibi's position, which we spoke about, is there anything else that you would like to say about how we got to this present moment before we leave today? Maybe as a warning for what not to do in the future.
We want to look forward. We don't want to look back. We are focused on what's next.
Thank you so much.
We'll have to think things over later.
Thank you. And I think that something that we've seen today,
to everyone.
Thank you, Chag Sameach. I think something we've seen today is that it might be a different Israel moving forward as well. So that with Ronit and with Yofi and with Shai's optimism, hopefully we can move together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good
Thank you
night.
for coming.
Bye-bye.
Good night.